The cemetery sat at the edge of the town, where the road turned to dust and silence. People avoided it after sunset, not because of ghosts, but because of the cat. Every evening, just before the sky turned black, a thin gray cat would appear between the graves and sit beside the same old tombstone. No matter the weather, no matter the season, rain flooded the paths, cold winds shook the trees, even stray dogs wandered nearby, but the cat never left. And the strange part was this: the grave belonged to a man who had died completely alone. But what happened next changed everything. For years, Elias Turner lived in a tiny wooden house near the train tracks. He was the kind of man people stopped noticing after a while. His back was bent from factory work. His coat smelled faintly of smoke, and his hands always trembled when he reached into his pocket for change. Most mornings, he walked slowly into town carrying an old paper bag with pieces of bread for birds. Children barely looked at him. Adults nodded politely, but kept walking. To the town, Elias was just another lonely old man waiting quietly for life to end. But no one knew the truth about him. Every night, after the town lights dimmed, Elias would sit on the steps outside his house with a small gray cat curled beside him. The cat had appeared one winter during a storm. Elias found it shivering beneath a broken bench near the station. "You look worse than I do," he had whispered with a tired smile. From that night on, the cat never left. He named her Myra. She followed him everywhere. To the bakery where he bought day-old bread. To the river where he sat for hours watching the water. Even to the cemetery where he visited his wife's grave every Sunday morning. His wife, Clara, had died 15 years earlier from illness. After she passed, Elias stopped laughing the same way. People said grief hollowed him out slowly, like water wearing down stone. But Myra changed something. Not completely. The sadness never disappeared, but the cat filled the silence inside the house. Elias would speak to her during dinner as if she understood every word. "You're the only one still listening," he often said softly. And maybe she was. One evening, the owner of the grocery store noticed Elias buying canned tuna instead of bread. "Special occasion," the owner joked. Elias smiled faintly. "It's Myra's birthday. At least I think it is." The owner laughed awkwardly, but Elias was serious. That night, he placed the tuna carefully onto a chipped plate, while Myra rubbed against his legs. He even lit half a candle beside her. He didn't know this would be the last peaceful night of his life. 3 days later, Elias collapsed near the train station. A young delivery driver found him lying on the sidewalk beside spilled groceries and melting ice. His breathing was weak. His hands searched the air desperately. "Myra," he whispered. The ambulance came quickly, but no family arrived at the hospital. No children, no relatives, just silence. For 2 days, Elias drifted in and out of sleep under white hospital lights. Nurses spoke kindly to him, but he barely answered. His eyes kept searching the doorway. Then, during the second night, one nurse noticed something strange outside the hospital entrance. A gray cat sat near the automatic doors, still watching. At first they tried chasing it away, but the cat returned every single hour. By morning, even the security guard gave up. "It's waiting for someone," he muttered. Inside the hospital room, Elias grew weaker. A nurse leaned closer and asked softly, "Do you have anyone we can call?" Elias looked toward the window. "My cat," he whispered. The nurse thought he was confused, but Elias smiled faintly. "She'll come." Hours later, his breathing slowed. Machines beeped quietly in the room while rain tapped against the glass. And then, suddenly, the gray cat appeared outside his hospital window, on the narrow ledge 3 floors above the ground. No one knew how she got there. The nurse froze in shock as the cat stared directly at Elias. For the first time in days, the old man opened his eyes fully. "Myra," he breathed. The cat pressed her paw gently against the glass. Elias smiled, and then he was gone. The funeral happened 4 days later. Only 5 people attended: the pastor, 2 hospital nurses, the grocery store owner, and the young driver who had found him near the station. Rain soaked the cemetery as the coffin disappeared into the earth. The ceremony lasted less than 20 minutes, but someone else was there. At the edge of the crowd, beneath a dead tree, Myra sat silently watching. The pastor noticed her first. "That cat again," he whispered. When everyone left, the cemetery grew quiet except for the rain. Myra walked slowly to the fresh grave and curled herself beside the wet soil. And she stayed there. The next morning, cemetery workers found her still sitting beside the grave. That evening, she was there again. Then another day, and another. People began talking. "She refuses to leave," one woman whispered at the bakery. "Animals don't mourn like humans," another replied nervously. But Myra remained. Weeks passed. The town slowly became fascinated by the lonely cat guarding the lonely man's grave. Teenagers came to take pictures. Elderly couples visited quietly after church. Someone even left a small bowl of water near the tombstone. But Myra trusted no one. If strangers came too close, she backed away carefully before returning the moment they left. Then winter arrived. Snow buried the cemetery paths. Winds screamed through the iron gates at night. Workers worried the cat would freeze to death. One evening, the young delivery driver, the same man who found Elias dying, approached carefully, carrying a blanket. "Come on," he whispered gently. "You can't stay here." Myra stared at him with tired yellow eyes. He placed food beside her and stepped back. But the cat didn't move. Instead, she pressed herself closer against the gravestone as snow gathered across her fur. The driver looked down at Elias' name carved into the stone. For the first time, guilt hit him hard. How had a man lived an entire life and died with almost no one beside him? And why was a cat the only soul refusing to forget him? But what happened next changed the entire town. One freezing morning, a little girl named Sophie disappeared. Her mother panicked after realizing the front door had been left slightly open. Police searched the streets, while neighbors shouted her name through the snow-covered town. Hours passed. Then someone noticed the gray cat running through the streets. Fast, purposefully, the cat stopped every few seconds, looking behind as if wanting someone to follow. The young delivery driver remembered Elias instantly. "Wait," he said suddenly. "Follow that cat." People thought he was crazy, but desperation leaves room for strange hope. The cat led them beyond the cemetery, toward an abandoned storage shed near the frozen river. Inside, curled beneath old blankets, was Sophie. Cold, shivering, alive. Her tiny voice cracked when rescuers carried her outside. "The kitty stayed with me," she whispered weakly. The entire town fell silent. From that day on, everything changed. People began visiting Elias' grave, not because of curiosity, but because they suddenly realized what loneliness looked like. Flowers appeared beside the tombstone, then letters. One note simply read, "I'm sorry we ignored you." Another said, "Thank you for being kind, even when nobody noticed." The grocery owner started leaving food for homeless people outside his store. The pastor began checking on elderly residents who lived alone. Even teenagers who once mocked the old cemetery started cleaning the graves on weekends. And always, beside Elias' grave, Myra watched quietly. Years passed. The cat grew older. Her movements slowed. Gray spread across her fur like winter frost. But she never left. One autumn evening, the delivery driver, whose name was Daniel, visited the cemetery after work, carrying fresh flowers. He had visited every week for nearly 6 years. The cemetery looked beautiful that evening. Orange leaves drifted through the cold air, while sunlight faded behind the hills. But something felt different. Myra was lying beside the grave, unusually still. Daniel knelt quickly beside her. Her breathing was faint. He gently stroked her fragile body as tears filled his eyes unexpectedly. "You waited long enough," he whispered shakily. The old cat opened her eyes one last time and rested her head against the gravestone. Then quietly she was gone. Daniel cried harder than he expected, not just for the cat, but for Elias, for all the lonely people the world forgets while they're still alive. The town buried Myra beside Elias the next morning, beneath the same dead tree where she once watched his funeral in silence. Hundreds of people attended. Hundreds. Some brought flowers. Others brought handwritten notes. One little girl, Sophie, now older, placed a tiny drawing beside the grave of an old man sitting beside a cat under the stars. At the bottom, she had written, "No one leaves if love is real." Years later, visitors still come to the cemetery at the edge of town. Some say they feel something peaceful there when the wind moves through the trees. Two graves rest side by side now, one for a forgotten old man and one for the cat that refused to abandon him. Their story spread far beyond the town because people recognized something painful inside it. Sometimes the deepest love comes from the quietest souls, and sometimes the ones we think are alone are the ones who taught the world how to care again. If this story stayed with you, subscribe for more stories that feel real.